Hello, distinguished viewers. Welcome to special broadcast to the World in Vietnam Report. My name is Xuân Sơn, and I'm going to be your host today. We're extremely honored to host Her Excellencies Pauline Tamesis, United Nations Resident Coordinator in Vietnam. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you. We gather here to delve into the discussions of Vietnam, the recent UPR dialogue sessions on May 7th, where Vietnam affirmed the role of independence, peace, the right to self-determination in the efforts towards human rights development and promotions. And once again, on behalf of the World in Vietnam Report, I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to our guest today.
Thank you.
So, to our first questions. So, what are your comments on Vietnam's the recent UPR dialogue sessions where there's lots of United Nations member states joining in?
In the fourth UPR dialogue, Vietnam received 320 recommendations from 133 countries. Other countries who were reviewed in the same session received comments from less than 100 member states. Compared to the third UPR cycle, the number of recommendations received from member states increased by 10%, from 291 to 320. This is all very positive. The numbers demonstrate great interest from UN member states in supporting the government of Vietnam to further advance human rights in the country. These also indicate the collective importance we give as international community to inclusive and sustainable development that expands the enjoyment of human rights. The strong engagement of UN member states also signals Vietnam's high profile in multilateral human rights mechanisms, not least as a member of the Human Rights Council for the 2023 to 2025 term. Further expanding and deepening multi-stakeholder engagement on the important actions moving forward will be equally important. Ensuring a whole of society participation throughout the process, particularly at the national, provincial, and local levels, remain key.
I think it is true to say that Vietnam attaches huge importance to UPR mechanisms and also the principles of transparency of the activities, dialogue, and cooperations of these very important mechanisms.
The UN recognizes that every country's development pathway is unique to its own circumstances and conditions, to its unique strengths and challenges. Each country must walk its own path towards a more inclusive and sustainable development that promotes human rights of all members of society. At the same time, as Deputy Minister Viet also emphasized in his interventions, that there are certain actions that help accelerate and strengthen the respect for universal human rights. Having a strong legal framework that puts human rights at the center was one of the examples that he highlighted. He also noted that inclusive and green socioeconomic development and reducing multidimensional poverty significantly contributes as well to advancing social and economic rights. These are areas where Vietnam has showed great progress. When we study the statements and recommendations received from 133 UN member states, we can observe how these come from diverse socio-economic and political realities. And yet, we also found many areas of convergence in their recommendations. To illustrate, 47 countries made recommendations on gender equality, women's empowerment, and gender-based violence. Vietnam's delegation confirmed that this is a priority for the country, highlighting the adoption of a national strategy on gender equality 2021 to 2030, and mentioned several master plans in preventing gender-based and domestic violence. Several countries also made recommendations on further aligning the application of the death penalty in Vietnam with international standards. Deputy Minister Viet acknowledged the large number of recommendations on this issue. He explained that while conditions in Vietnam currently do not allow for abolition, steps are being taken to reduce the number of crimes subject to the penalty and to strengthen safeguards in sentencing and executions. So while each country will advance its own development path, there are measures that can strengthen adherence of UN member states to the international human rights obligations which they have ratified. To have a constructive conversation on how each country can further promote and protect fundamental social, economic, civil, and political rights in their own context. This is the purpose and focus of the UPR review cycle.
I think Vietnam really paid due attention to the UPR recommendations and achieved various positive results from social welfare to gender equalities. So how does these sessions, these dialogue sessions, reflect Vietnam, the efforts and commitments as a member of United Nations Human Rights Council for the 2023 to 2025 terms?
So Vietnam showed both serious preparation and openness to international dialogue in its engagement in the UPR process. The Vietnamese delegation indicated that Vietnam is ready to consider the statements and recommendations offered by other member states in a constructive and cooperative manner. Openness to international dialogue on human rights characterizes Vietnam's efforts as a member of the UN Human Rights Council for the 2023-2025 term. Vietnam has engaged actively in this multilateral forum, leading initiatives such as the celebration of the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and co-sponsoring annual resolutions on human rights and climate change. Earlier this year, His Excellency Foreign Minister Son announced that Vietnam will seek re-election to the Human Rights Council for the 2026 to 2028 term. This signals Vietnam's willingness to continue assuming the important responsibility of being a Human Rights Council member. This responsibility includes demonstrating concrete efforts to protect and promote economic, social, cultural, civil, political rights in Vietnam, in the country, and in line with international human rights standards and the human rights treaties that the country has ratified.
And I think not only in the short term of being a United Nations Human Rights Council member, but also in the long term, Vietnam will continue to fulfill its obligations and commitments in human rights within the international treaties that Vietnam is a member to. So these positive results that Vietnam has accomplished could not be done without the biggest support from United Nations. So how had United Nations supported and participated with Vietnam in the UPR process?
As with the past UPR cycles, the United Nations country team in Vietnam has sought to actively support the government and the people of Vietnam to promote a meaningful, results-oriented, and inclusive UPR process. We do so within the 2022 to 2026 UN-Vietnam Cooperation Framework and in line with the standard role of the United Nations in all countries undergoing a UPR review process. Our support focuses on two areas. First, and most importantly, is to facilitate inclusion and participation by a broad range of stakeholders throughout the UPR process. Around the world, the meaningful engagement of diverse social, political, and professional organizations, non-governmental organizations, communities, vulnerable groups, their participation in the UPR process is an integral part of the UN mandate to ensure no one is left behind. So this includes youth, women, the elderly, ethnic minorities, migrants, LGBTI persons, and persons with disabilities. We hope that in the next steps to prioritize and adopt recommendations, efforts to engage these sectors can be redoubled. The UN will continue to support the government of Vietnam to that end. The second area is in providing technical inputs on how to help advance the implementation of the UPR recommendations. Technical inputs align with the joint priorities agreed in our cooperation framework. It's in 4 areas, namely inclusive social development, climate change response, disaster resilience, and environmental sustainability. Third, shared prosperity through economic transformation. And fourth, in governance and access to justice. Through our development cooperation programs, we continue to contribute to the implementation of UPR recommendations. Our programs in gender equality and in efforts to combat gender-based violence, in our projects to increase the child friendliness of the justice system, in our interventions to strengthen social protection systems, in our engagement in advancing the rights and inclusion of persons with disabilities, and in projects to combat human trafficking. These are just some of the examples of how we contribute to the implementation of recommendations. We also provide technical feedback and advice to the government of Vietnam on priorities to advance the country's own sovereign path towards expanded respect of human rights. We are grateful and privileged to be able to play that role based on more than 45 years of trust and fruitful partnership between the United Nations and Vietnam.
Thank you for sharing such insightful thoughts on Vietnam, the recent UPR dollar sessions, as well as cooperations among Vietnam's and United Nations in the year to come. We appreciate your time and the depth of discussion we have managed to achieve today. And to our viewers, we hope that these discussions have provided you a deeper understanding on Vietnam, the UPR dollar sessions, and as a member of the United Nations Human Rights Council for the 2023-2025 terms. And thank you for watching. The World in Vietnam reports look forward to bringing to you more updates and analyzations in the future. Thank you so much.